Afternoon and evening, folks, and welcome to week 6 of our COVID calls. I am Joe, and I'm wearing a tie because I realized that some time ago I spent a lot of money on this tie and I never got to use it. And what better reason? It wasn't in any way to show up the rest of my untied guests, who are Tyler Shultz and Shannon Clark, you remember from last week. And we have new friends today, Ian and Tim. You heard from Tim a little bit last week, but who the hell is Ian? Why don't you tell us?
I have a background in microbiology and medical diagnostic science. I've worked in industry in novel diagnostics and active implantable devices. I'm currently consulting with Lean RIQA.
And why did I invite you to join us today? What have you got to add to this conversation?
Yeah, so I've been working through the emergency use authorization process with a few manufacturers, some of our clients, and just an interesting process. I'd love to talk about some of the finer details on serological tests and the challenges from a manufacturer's perspective and some of the things the agency is doing to help reassure the public on the accuracy issues we've seen.
Thank you. And Tim, last week, when you were one of our just guests, you shared quite a bit, including a test that I think is now commercially available as of this last week.
Yes, yeah, it's commercially available. We actually should receive our first shipment on Wednesday. And it's, you know, right now we can only sell to accredited and compliant CLIA laboratories. So we're hoping that in the next 14 days we'll get the EUA designation and then go from there.
Okay, so I suspect there are some on the call who might not completely know what a CLIA is. Would you tell us?
Oh, great. Now, great. The
Clinically?
You know what? That's a good question off the top of my head. Everybody asks me that. It's right there on the FDA. I'm sorry, it's on my back screen.
It's all right.
I can look that up.
Well, tell us in general, then I'll Google it while you're talking.
Yeah. So what it is
exactly what.
Yeah, with the FDA, they designate the laboratories on the complexity of what they're able to perform, what tests they can perform. So it's the highest complexity of test that you can perform, and I'm sure Ian knows a lot more about this than I do. So there's different levels. Whether you're compliant or accredited means that you're doing the high complexity laboratory test. And what we're hoping to get, once you get the UAE, you get to drop down to a waiver. And a lot of your physicians, plastic surgeons, and dermatologists have CLIA compliant waiver status. And that's where it's going to start to open up, and we're going to have a lot more tests being performed. And then from there, they're looking at just general physicians and eventually home use.
Just for labs, I looked it up. It stands for Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, and there are more than 250,000 laboratory entities that fall under that. So that's enough people for you to interact with.
Well, it is, but the reality is a lot of them, most of them already have the large, you know, analyzers and, you know, the Abbotts, and, you know, they've got the big machines. So they're doing the test for $1.50, you know, to $2.50, and they're the ones that are cranking out all the tests. The problem is they're backed up, and some of them will be, you know, it'll take them 24 hours to, I've heard, as long as 10 to 12 days to get a response back to a patient. You know, and they're sending them in, and then they're just taking forever to get responses. Reality is, you know, everybody needs to know. They need to know right away. Okay, where am I at? And the nice part about our tests, because there are some other serological tests out there right now that, you know, will take 10 to 15 minutes, and ours is a 3-minute test. So
Do you have a box that you can hold up?
I don't, like I said, the first actual finalized picture of it that we have is going to be on Wednesday. It gets here after, after doing all the graphics and everything like that. So Wednesday's the first delivery where we can actually show it and be able to send it out and everything. So we're excited. It's still, I knew I spoke too soon when I approached the group and said this, because I wanted to have all the ducks in a row, and we were still, in the process of getting everything together. But we're really excited about it, and we're already taking orders, so that's fun. But we will have everything done soon.
Okay, and are there other? So I'm trying to understand what you brought to or bringing to market. How does that differ relative to anything else that's available?
Well, one of the things is most of those other tests will take 10 to 15 minutes, and so it's going to take longer.
The primary value then is the time, and that it can be at home. Are there any at home now?
I'm sorry, what?
Are there any products available for home use now?
No. Well, except there is one, but my understanding is that product that they just approved this last week for home use is one that you do it at home, but you still have to ship it into the laboratory to get your answer. So it's not that 3-minute, yeah, I can walk into the basketball game now, or I can walk into the movie theater or whatever. And that's where we want to get to. And as you saw, Congress is starting to push back and saying we need to really check these test kits out to make sure that they are accurate. And that's one of the things with our test is, we did evaluate 392 patients, but it's also being evaluated currently in the New York Blood Center with a huge population. So we're hoping to have that study done within the next 3 weeks, probably a week after we get our UEA status. And then we'll have a lot of data from here in the US where everybody will be able to do it. We also have Cleveland Clinic and Cincinnati Hospital. They're doing another independent study for us as well.
Shannon, you did a lot of head nodding. What can you tell us?
I just want to provide an update that yes, the Pixel from LabCorp was approved just this past week, which is very excited that we now have a swab that can be collected in the home and then sent back and analyzed. So that is a kind of a new current event that occurred, but still no serological test kits allowed in the homes. They have to be sold, as Tim pointed out, to medium and or high complexity CLIA compliant labs, which sort of defeats the purpose in some ways, but as Tim pointed out, they are sort of at capacity. So these are facilitating them to do more tests and faster tests once they have those samples. But I think the whole power in a serological test kit is that you can use a drop of blood to assess the blood at the point of use, which could be the home. So that's sort of the holy grail, in my opinion.
Tyler, you know a thing or two about using a drop of blood to perform a lot of magic. Can you provide some perspective here? And for those of you who might be joining us for the first time and don't know who the hell he is, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Tyler Shultz. I'm most well known for my role in exposing the Theranos scandal back in 2015. I've since started my own little diagnostics company. We just raised we raised a small seed round almost 2 years ago, focused on turning like a proof of concept circuit board that we developed in a lab at Stanford into a usable product. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And yes, just since, owing to my role in Theranos and starting this diagnostic company of my own, a lot of people have been asking me about, what is going on with coronavirus testing, because it seems like diagnostics has not been in the news so much since Theranos in 2015. So I think people kind of circle back to me a little bit. Yeah, so I mean, when I'm listening to, I'm mostly curious about how companies are going about actually validating these, because it seems like when I looked at the FDA emergency use authorization policy, that there's very little in there. And the section that is specific to serological testing is actually only 78 words. it's extremely vague. It says you need to test cross-reactivity, you need to do some clinical validation, but it doesn't say how many samples to test. It doesn't give you any specific metrics that need to be hit. So I'm curious to hear from Tim, with policies that are that vague, how do you go about actually setting standards for yourself, and how do you go about holding yourself to a high standard when the actual FDA policy is pretty relaxed?
No, it's a great question, and the nice part is all of the labs that I'm talking with and discussing with, the first thing they're asking is, well, there's the main things they're asking is sensitivity and specificity, and then they're like, okay, what is your study size? How many people have you used to validate it? And at the very beginning, there are some out there that have validated it on 5 patients, and they're like, woohoo, we can start selling. At first we did 112 patients, and then we did another 392 patients, and then really to take it to the next level, that's why we went to the Blood Center of New York to really get a large group. And then on top of that, we have UC Davis also doing some testing for us, but then Cleveland Clinic, Cincinnati Hospital. It's a matter of building up all that data, and I think that's the responsible thing to do with all these companies, and it's the number one thing that everybody's asking for. So being someone that wants to be that the go-to test that's accurate, 3 minutes, we want to have that validation behind us. And they're starting to push back on the ones that are like, well, hey, here you can, our test kit is $10. You can use it anywhere. Just don't say anything. But we've tested it on 5 patients, and that's where they're having all the problems. Well, the good part is the customers, the labs, they're questioning everything, which is great for us.
I just had a
Question.
Heather's asking, what company are you with, Tim? And it's your own company. It's called Curevoya.
Curevoya.
Can you tell us how many folks are you? How well funded are you? How long have you been around?
Well, Curevoya's been around about 10 years. So it's really just over 10 years, medical distribution company. So I get brought in by companies to help them distribute worldwide products. So that's really what happened. And in fact, I don't just have one test kit. I have 2 others that I'm evaluating right now. A third company out of Korea has asked me to help them get in the US and evaluate their product as well.
So you didn't manufacture the test you've been talking about?
No, I did not manufacture it, but I am brought in by that company to help them.
Can you tell us who the company is, or their country of origin, or anything like that?
The company is based in the US. The company is based in the US, and it was developed and everything in the US, but they do have OEM manufacturing done in China, before, that's where everybody's going because they could get it made there cheaper. Okay. Another company that I'm helping right now is another US based company, but it is manufactured in the US. Then like I said, I have one in Korea that wants me to help them come into the US, and another one in China that wants to help me. So, every company that I'm working with, first thing I want them to do is to agree to doing more clinical studies in the US to prove it before we move forward and stuff. So that's, I want to be able to, and I also, bring in PPE equipment. I bring in the mask. I'm working with one of the manufacturers in China that actually wants to bring over the whole manufacturing equipment here into the US to do manufacturing in the US. And so I'm working with some investors on bringing that over. Then we own it and we're up and running, because even in China, the manufacturers that I'm working with there, they know that at any point China can close the door. And they're saying, you know what? Here, we'll work with you. We'll help you set up the equipment and do it. Or you can lease a whole line of their equipment. You buy it outright for about $300,000, and then everything that comes off that line is yours. So there's a lot of pieces moving. And what I want to do is be able to find the best things for everyone to use, and not just be, you know, one company. I want to offer, here are your choices. Okay, here's what we suggest, but you get to make the decision. The process for me started back in January because I got the virus before it was even really, you know, started to talk about it. I'm in California. I was laid up for 5 weeks. I'd traveled to Korea, and I'd been Seattle and down in LA for a while, but I got wiped out for 5 weeks with this, and it was nasty. Didn't know what it was, and then all this happened, and it's nothing like I've ever had before. And I will tell you that the only thing that I think saved me was I have asthma, so I use an inhaler, and I was using my inhaler while I was sick. I was traveling actually at the time. I was just taking off. I had to call up my plastic surgeon friend and said, look, I need antibiotics now. He got them for me on the weekend. Without that, I was clueless. I just thought it was a flu. I think I would have been in some serious problems. And then when I finally felt better, I had everybody, I do a lot of business with Korea and China and in Europe. So I had everybody contacting me and say, hey, Tim, how can I get test kits? How can I get masks? How can I get this? I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then when I finally realized, hey, dumbass, that was you that almost died, you know, I'm like, you know what? I've got to step in here and see what I can do just to help.
I didn't know about that, and that's quite a story. And yeah, I suspect near-death experiences have an impact on people. Mercifully, I've just heard about them so far. Ian, I'd like to give you the mic. Tyler mentioned that the EUA language, I think it was all of 78 words long. How do you, as a regulatory consultant, make hay out of 78 words and understand how we can do this in a way that's efficacious and safe?
Yeah. So a lot of what we do is reading between the lines, and you can get a good idea of what
There aren't that many
FDA.
lines.
Sorry, what?
There aren't that many lines with 78. I mean, even if you double
Right,
say.
right. It's a good point. So one of the ways we can get an idea about what FDA is expecting is looking at the products they've cleared already. Thankfully, there's a lot of transparency in the labeling, and all of the performance is in the instructions for use documents. So you can go to an Abbott test, you can go to a Cepheid test, you can go to the Asorin serological test that was just cleared, look in their IFU, you can see the clinical studies they've done, you can see the reactivity, you can see the sample size. Outside of that, you can also engage FDA, and there's a number of ways to do that. They have their CDRH EUA templates email address. I've been getting responses from FDA on Saturdays. They're literally working around the clock. FDA also has a virtual town hall series that I think there's another one on the 29th. But Dr. Timothy Stencil, the director for CDRH OIVD, gets on there. It's a live Q&A. You can ask questions. You can ask specific questions. And he's actually offered to personally handle some of the issues manufacturers have been going through. So I found that FDA has been really responsive. They'll send you more information, engage you in a pre-EUA dialogue. And I found that, you know, the information is out there if you look for it. I also wanted to just address a quick thing. Tim was talking about the need to validate these tests accurately. FDA has recently partnered with NIH, CDC, and BARDA to put together a program where serological test manufacturers, tests that have been notified, and also EUA or tests going down that route, have the opportunity to send their tests into the NIH to be independently validated with a positive and negative serum set.
Is that
it looks.
Or is that like an extracurricular activity?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
So is that required now, or is that just like an option you want to go above and beyond?
It's a voluntary program, but I think it's FDA's response to this kind of fever pitch public outcry over accuracy of serological tests. I mean, I think many of you probably read the New York Times article and a lot of other publications that have been fomenting this kind of concern. So FDA is offering this service right now. I understand it's free, and it's something all serological tests should look into.
That's great.
I have a question for Tim. So you commented that you've tested over 400 patients. That's so awesome. I was just wondering what you selected for your comparison product, and whether you limited it to PCR testing, or do you have a specific comparison?
It was PCR testing. Yeah.
I have a few questions having come in. Franklin asks, is there information, what is the information source on what devices and diagnostic kits have been authorized so far under EUA? Ian?
So a list of which devices have been authorized?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can go to the FDA emergency use authorization page, and they have it broken down by in vitro diagnostic tests, commercial high complexity laboratories. They also have it by ventilators, and FDA will have a list of tests that have been authorized and also tests that have been notified. There's also another way to see which tests have been have registered under the QKO product code. In the establishment registration database, you can search there, and that's a comprehensive list. I think Shannon shared a screenshot of perhaps that last week with all the notified tests as they're required to register.
QKO stands for?
I think that's the serological test product code that they're using for these notified tests.
Okay, and if you're able, perhaps when someone else is answering a question, maybe mute yourself, and if you can find the link, we can post it for folks to take a look. Franklin also asks if any of us know how LabCorp intends to distribute the pixel swabs to at-home consumers. Is this something that, and this is me now, is that something that I would go to Walgreens and buy? Could I order them online? Do we have any idea where?
They have to be shipped to the home of the person.
So individuals would have to know to ask and buy them?
I'm not sure.
If anyone on the call has an idea, we'll.
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's one of the reasons why, with our rollout plan, as approval starts to happen, and I will just go backwards for a second. Ian's point on the FDA, they have been incredibly responsive on any questions that we've been sending them. They've been great. But as far as rolling it out, I mean, one of the plans we're looking at to roll out after we get it to the physicians, we have protocols set up for physicians so that they're actually already reaching out to businesses so that they call up a business. In fact, the Bay Area, I have a physician there that's already called up businesses and said, look, I can get all your employees back to work. What we do is we're going to have the test kits come in here. We're going to get them shipped to you. You're going to send it out to all your, the employees and their families. They'll test it. What we want to do, and we don't have approval yet, is we want to do the validation that they would call in on Skype, Zoom, or FaceTime or whatever to the physician with his nurses. Then they can evaluate the actual reading, acknowledge what the test kit says, and release them to go back to work. That would, for us, would be the best way to do it, is through physicians actually evaluating them. And then when that happens, hopefully sometime we will get a home test kit. But I think that's the next step versus going straight to a home test kit.
Christine writes in, it likely have to be shipped with the kit. Otherwise, there's a major risk of sample contamination, which sounds reasonable to me. Shannon, you asked for the screen. What are you sharing with us?
Well, so as of last week, these were the EUA authorized and validated serological test kits. So these are the ones that are currently authorized. There may have been more. Ian could probably speak to that over the past couple of days because I haven't checked back. But then in blue, I have a couple of details about the fact that they have to be used by CLIA labs. So there's some links in this presentation if you want to access it from last week that would bring you to that list of EUA products.
Okay. And this is the same presentation we shared last week. So I have that link, and if you have it handy, we can post that in here for folks to download if they were not here last week.
And then this is the list of all serological test kits for which companies have notified the FDA that they will sell them. Just much like Curvoya, I'm sure right now you haven't notified. Well, I don't know. Do you plan to notify the FDA and then subsequently get the EUA?
Yeah,
or,
we have notified, and we're in the process of getting the paperwork to them for the EUA.
Excellent. Yeah, so the process that these companies will go through is that they'll notify, they'll be sure to add key language, this key language they're labeling, saying that this test has not been reviewed by the FDA, and these bullet points must be in the labeling. But then as soon as you get that emergency use authorization, you can alter your labeling to be a little bit more aggressive, as with these for currently authorized serological test kits. So that'll be an exciting moment for Curvoya.
Yes.
Folks, I just found that link and I sent it out to all of you. These are the slides that Shannon is presently sharing. And if you want to flip through them, if you have a question about them, we'll be able to address them. A couple more questions coming in. If you finished your thought, Shannon?
Yes.
Okay. Carolina asks, have you guys heard about these breath analyzer diagnostic tests that provide results in less than a minute? First, have you heard of it? And second, do you have any idea how those would be regulated?
That's so exciting. I have not heard anything like that, but I have been hearing about some really exciting, different, unique ways like skin testing or even the use of artificial intelligence. But the breath, I'm not surprised to hear that, but yeah, hopefully that will work. I've done testing on breath samples actually. So UserWise worked with Carrot, which is a company that basically has a breathalyzer for smokers. It's a product that will tell you whether you have smoked or not. It'll say how much CO is in your breath. So I'd imagine that the product might work similarly and require validation in a similar manner with a clinical test with at least 60 subjects to ensure statistical significance. If intended for use by lay people, then it would require human factors testing as well. But in my experience developing breath sampling products as well as inhalers, it is a little bit challenging to train lay people on proper application of breath because you can have a lot of variability in the way you're using your lungs to deposit the breath. So it's just a consideration. I guess if I were to, I mean, it's certainly a trade-off because serological testing, I really feel good about the use of blood because that'll tell a strong story to the diagnostic assay. But the use of breath is non-invasive, so that has huge benefits, but a little bit more variable and impacted by, you know, smoking or various other things that you can do that might affect the breath sample itself.
And Layla, I think that's the way to pronounce your name. You've written a few comments here. I just made your mic live. You were asking about saliva and a few other points. Do you want to talk with us now?
Sure, thank you. This is Lilia Adelina Panascu. I'm a clinical and quality and regulatory consultant. I basically assist small companies primarily to go through the process of gathering the clinical data, submitting to FDA. So my question was, I saw in the news something related to saliva test devices or attempts to. Can anyone elaborate on this? I don't know much, but I'm curious if one of you know.
Yeah, I can take that, Joe. So FDA did authorize the use of a saliva specimen. It's out of Rutgers Clinical Genomics Laboratory. It still has to be performed in under CLIA environment under a healthcare practitioner, but it's stored and transported at ambient temperature and tested within 48 hours of collection. But it's called the TAC-PATH SARS-CoV-2 assay, and again, Rutgers Clinical Genomics Laboratory. And if you go to the emergency use authorization link we shared, you can get more information on that test.
Thank you. Victoria has a question for Tim. She also has asthma, and she recently renewed her inhaler, and she wonders if you have volunteered any of your antibodies. We want your antibodies.
I'm actually in the process of getting that done. Yeah, that's.
How do you do that? Who do you contact?
I have my regulatory person is setting that all up for me. So because we have some connections with the FDA and stuff like that, so they want me to do that, and I don't know if it's going to be any different because I have asthma or not. So, but I will tell you that you could just feel it coming down into your lungs, and it was the only thing that held it off. And so, man, if you have inhalers, get them renewed. But I'm not a doctor, okay?
Tyler, let me ask. When I wasn't paying really close attention to the Theranos story, and it was just, hey everybody, drop of blood, miracle diagnostics, everything. And then it was, well, that's not feasible with our current technology. How is all of the serological diagnostic work that we're talking about now not so much different? Maybe it's just a matter of scope that Theranos was saying, and we can run all of these tests versus a test or this test. Can you talk me through the complications of testing through a drop of blood?
Well, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with testing just a drop of blood. If you're just testing for one thing, that is probably enough. Theranos' big problem is that they were trying to test for hundreds of things from a single drop of blood, which means you need to dilute that blood a lot, which means that you need a very sensitive technology, and our technology was not that sensitive. So it was just not going to work. Another problem with the Theranos platform was that you could only run one test at a time. So first of all, we only had a few things validated on the platform, but even if we had hundreds of things validated on the platform, you would need to run hundreds of different tests on hundreds of different machines. So it's just not a scalable process at all. But to kind of connect things back to where we are today, I think that Theranos would be thriving in this environment. I mean, thriving. I think they would have easily passed the FDA validation requirements. They would be cranking out samples. They would be, I think they would be giving a lot of misdiagnoses right now. And I don't think that consumers will actually be able to easily tell the difference between accurate and inaccurate tests. If you go and you give blood and they say you didn't have antibodies or you did have antibodies, how are you going to possibly know the difference? So I think it really is up to the CLIA labs to do their own validation of the tests that they use, and up to the FDA to try to seek out the people who are abusing these lax requirements. And I do think that the FDA is in a pretty tough spot because, they don't want to be the stiflers of innovation. They don't want to slow the rollout of these tests. So they've made it as easy as possible for people to innovate and for people to get these tests out in the market. But there are absolutely going to be people who abuse that. So I think that it's great. That it does sound like a lot of companies are going above and beyond what is actually required. And it sounds like the FDA has made it easy to work with them. They've provided these programs to work with the NIH. So I hope that companies actually do those things rather than just do the bare minimum, sell a test. Because I was curious about my own serological status. So on Friday, I actually just ordered a test for myself from Quest, and it costs $169, which is not cheap. And if you just do the quick math, in order to test 10% of our population, that's going to cost $5.5 billion. So I would say that there are companies that would not think twice about risking your health to get a slice of that pie.
Mm. Wow, that's quite a perspective. Let me
tell
ask.
us more about your experience. What was your experience getting tested?
So it was actually wonderful. I got this email from Quest. I mean, I'm probably on an email list that not that many people are on, but I got this. Actually, no, it wasn't actually from Quest. It was from like an online platform that where you can order lab tests for yourself. So I got that email. I opened it. I saw that they had the tests available. I ordered one for myself, and I went to schedule an appointment at Quest. And I saw the only appointment that they had for that day was in 15 minutes. So I booked it, hopped in my car, drove to Quest, and had a needle in my arm within 15 minutes. And then in less than 24 hours, they actually emailed me my results. And the results were negative. But it was a pretty great process. I'd have to say it was really quick. There was nobody else in Quest. So it was really, usually when I go to Quest, you have to sit there for like hours waiting for your number to come up or whatever, but it was really efficient.
So to the point you made earlier, you got a result that you were happy with. How do you know it's right?
No, you have no idea.
I mean, you assume, well, it's Quest, it's a major test and they have a whole business, it's gotta be, but to your point.
Yeah, so exactly. So they, I trust, Quest has done this a lot. They use the Abbott diagnostic machinery and tests. So I trust Abbott and I trust Quest. And they said that they were submitting their emergency use authorization to the FDA on Monday. So they were in a few days, they were going to submit their data. So I knew that their data had not been reviewed by the FDA, but I trust Abbott, I trusted Quest, but really I don't know. There's no way of actually knowing if the result is correct. And the reason why I was curious about my own status was because I had gone to Mardi Gras, and then we know that New Orleans has had a big outbreak, probably because of Mardi Gras. Shortly after, I flew to a conference that was in Toronto, so I was traveling, somewhat internationally. And then my girlfriend is a dentist at UCSF, and we know that dentists actually have extremely high are at extremely high risk because of all the aerosols that are generated when they're working in people's mouths. And the day after the shelter in place went into effect in San Francisco, I had, pretty much normal cold symptoms, which could have been COVID. I had sore throat, low fever, low cough. So I was curious about whether that was a cold or whether that was possibly COVID. So that's why I went and got myself tested, and it came back negative.
Let me just, before we move on to the next thing, because I don't have a scientific background and I'm really quite simple when you come right down to it. Can I reasonably say that with a drop of blood, any one test can reasonably be run? And that the Theranos problem was just the dilution of a single drop of blood, or the concept of single drop of blood is valid, yes?
Yeah, I think there are lots of things that you can measure from a single drop of blood. I would not say that all things, and a lot of it depends on how you get that single drop of blood. So things like, one thing at Theranos that we really struggled with was potassium. And the theory is for potassium, when you prick your finger and you're trying to get the drop of blood out, Theranos actually need to collect far more than a drop of blood. So you would need to really squeeze your finger for a couple minutes sometimes to get enough blood out. And that process of squeezing your finger actually ruptures cells and releases interstitial fluid, which can have high concentrations of potassium and probably a lot of other things and other electrolytes. So we would sometimes get potassium results that were so high that the patient should have been dead. So things like potassium, you probably shouldn't do from a finger prick, but I do believe that a lot of things you can accurately get from a finger prick.
And I have a miscellaneous question, Tyler, wondering if you know. So the instructions for ChemBio say to wipe your first drop of blood and then take the second drop of blood. What happens if you just take the first drop of blood?
I mean, I think my understanding is that it might just be a little bit contaminated by other things that you had on your finger, but
But
that's
if
a
you
good.
wipe your finger, maybe it should be fine.
Sorry, what was that?
But if you wiped your finger to begin with, perhaps the first drop of blood is fine.
Well, maybe, but then you still have potentially alcohol residues on your finger. So, you know, prick your finger. I mean, wipe your finger, wipe off all the crap that's on there. Prick your finger once, and then that first drop of blood could potentially remove the alcohol, and then the next drop of blood would maybe be more representative. That's just, I don't actually know that for sure, but that's kind of what I thought.
Makes
I'm going to
sense.
do just a little quick house cleaning here. First, John Hannigan says, good point on squeezing near the sample site. Christine Zamarodian says, finger stick capillary blood is quite difficult to analyze. And I just want to take a note about next week, we're going to talk about intellectual property when you're open sourcing a project like working on a ventilator and the like. I would like, you know, while the audience is quite still full, I invite folks to type in now what other topics you'd like us to cover. I was saying before the call, when it was just the panelists and me online, I wonder how many weeks this call will make sense. And the reason is when I first thought we really need to come together as a community and have these conversations and collaborate and help, I thought the two, now three, main issues are PPE, ventilators, and testing. And the ventilator one was the one that seemed so overwhelming. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get that many? And I don't know if you've seen, but Dyson, who was one of the first out of the gate, ended up making 0 ventilators. And the NHS said, hey, thanks, we're good. And when a lot of people came to the fore and said, I have a prototype, I have an idea, I have a this or that. In week 3, we talked with Tom Kroll about that and how Medtronic put out its older ventilator design and, you know, open source, go ahead and make them. But there's a lot, Ian will tell us, that goes into getting those cleared for use. And by the time they do, and other people said, well, by the time they do isn't a valid argument because third world countries haven't really, you know, some places in Africa haven't really been hit yet. And when they get hit, they're really going to need stuff. So go ahead and design. I think where we ended up from that conversation was if you are small and you're thinking, hey, I can help with a design or maybe I'll work with someone on a ventilator, you're not going to get very far. And that the only chance you have is to be a size of a Dyson. And even Dyson didn't get it done. So as far as I know, the only incremental volume for ventilators being brought to bear right now is GM and Ford. That's all I hear about. It was the subject of 60 Minutes this week. I know we're talking testing here, and I've just brought up a completely different topic on ventilators, but do the panelists here or anyone here on the call have a perspective on that? I don't know.
Yeah, Joe, I'll give you a quick 2 cents for me is that on the ventilators, I had access to 250 ventilators, of course, out of China. And that was, you know, 4 weeks ago. And I put it out there to try to see, you know, who would want them. And there were no buyers. Nobody wanted to buy them. So, you know, and then I had another 40 that were CE cleared, and I tried to go international with those, and there wasn't enough interest. There was nobody that was, and it's not like the price was outrageous on either one of these. Everybody was in a wait and see. They're like, well, you know, we may need them. You know, there's a little bit of a panic on them, and it turned out to be, you know, nothing. But that's what happened with me on the supply chain side.
Did you take stock of them, or were you just
Oh, no,
serving
but yeah, I'm just, boom, boom, switching them off. And that had nothing to do with it. And I know that that's some of the issues with the mask right now that, which, I get access to masks, but we have to take full payment before we can ship them out of China. Even though we're on they're the same ones made for the Red Cross and they're on the same plane. Nobody wants to pay for them until they hit the street here, in the US. And the problem with that is, okay, you want me to put out $15 million to acquire these, fly them over on the hope that you're going to want them and pay for them. So that's the supply side issue with just the mask right now. We're actually working with a couple of banks to see about pulling over, hundreds of millions of masks to the US so that they're on the ground and people will be able to get them and buy them. But nobody's willing to be that person that pays for them in China, even though we have an agency that verifies them. They're the same ones on the Red Cross. They're the same plane as the Red Cross that we hired. But that's just the issues we're running into.
You brought up so many points there. I just want to first go back to ventilators, where you had inventory of 250 of them. Were they like well-known, people who always make ventilators, and that was the inventory you had? And
they were FDA
they said, no, we're good.
They were FDA cleared.
And you approached hospital systems, and they said, no, we don't need them.
Even state governments, everything, and even New York, which
was talking about how we need 30,000 of them.
Yes.
I don't understand this disconnect.
That's what caught me off guard. I was sitting there thinking, okay, I'm helping out. Here it is. And I was getting the, we're still in the let's decide, figure it out mode.
Shannon?
Yeah.
So I think that ventilator business people are really hopeful for that second wave. That's when the ventilator frenzy will actually occur. In speaking to healthcare providers, I have a colleague who works in the Stanford emergency room, and he was saying, wow, Santa Clara, we are just doing the best job of sheltering in place. Like, we're just hanging out here in the emergency room. Things are really quiet. That's here in Santa Clara where we have, COVID everywhere, right? And then I was also speaking with another paramedic over in Texas, actually Louisiana. And so he's in another hub, and he was saying that at first they were just intubating, using invasive ventilators for every single COVID patient. But then they realized that they didn't actually need to go to that extreme, and they've been scaling back to BiPAPs and less invasive techniques that don't require these really fancy ventilators. So I think there's been a change in protocol. I also think that our sheltering in place in some regions has been very effective. But as soon as we all go back to work, I think that's the moment when we will need a lot more ventilators. And that's why we're seeing so much apprehension among the federal government, the state governments, hospitals in acquiring many ventilators. I'm also working with a couple of ventilator companies, and I've been trying to help them get funding. And the problem is everyone wants it now. So anyone who's developing a ventilator is also, affected by this. They're not able to get funding to continue development of their ventilators just because of this kind of trickle down of people don't really need ventilators right now because we're sort of controlling it.
Muted myself there. I don't understand I don't really need ventilators right now. All these stories about we don't have enough equipment and there are 2 people to a ventilator. Well, this is just such a terrific disconnect. I don't understand. James, I made you a panelist because you have overwhelmed me with comments and questions. That's one way to get some camera time. Can you put your camera on?
Sure. There we go.
There's James, everybody. If you can summarize the 24 points that you've made while we've been talking, that would be helpful.
I'm so sorry, Joe. I don't mean.
No, it's okay. It's all good. It's all good.
Well, there's a couple of things that are happening right now.
First,
Tim,
let the people at home know who the hell you are and why we should listen to anything you say.
okay, great. My name's Jim Belandy. I am the Vice President of Sales for SPBS. We are a biomedical / clinical engineering services company located out of Dallas, Texas. We've been in business for 40 years, blah, 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 blah. We're also considered an asset manager. We've been providing services on the front line in New York City, behind the scenes, of course, with our BMET teams, also down in Texas and New Mexico, where we're located, in Missouri. A couple of things that we've been doing is we've been repairing a lot of old, antiquated, beat up ventilators and bringing them back to life. We've done hundreds of them, and either at the state levels, the SEMA and FEMA and health departments who have these emergency stockades that go untested for years because they don't have it in the budget to maintain their equipment on an annual basis as they should. They have to be brought back to life. And that is a daunting challenge, let me tell you, especially from a supply chain perspective, and trying to find all the parts that are hopefully to be in the secondary marketplace. Well, we were able to get them up, operational. Took a little bit longer than we thought. So at least our company's participation in this, we've put several hundred ventilators back into operation that weren't before. So I think part of that dynamic is what has caused the slowdown. The other part of this equation is that right now, overseas, the perspective of healthcare in general, from a ventilator perspective, they're not very trusted unless they're known names. And Joe, you brought up one, producing these ventilators and or having these in-stock ventilators, it's considered suspect. And regardless of FDA clearance, regardless of, they don't know the condition, they don't know if they're used, they don't know, because there are so many medical websites that are out there, medical equipment websites that were selling ventilators. We did some of our repairs for the largest medical auction house in the country, both in Chicago and Dallas, Centurion. And we did a lot of the repairs for their ventilators to get them up to New York City in a timely fashion. And, .med sold ventilators, and .med sold out of all their old ventilators in a day. And Centurions took theirs off their website from their auction and just had us rebuild them, and were sent up to New York. So, and a couple other parts because they, whatever. Anyway, so there was a mad dash, and not knowing condition, not knowing manufacturer's name. There's a lot of skepticism in the marketplace as it related to ventilators. One of the things that we were trying to do, our market is split between hospitals and like surgery centers and clinics and the like. So we've got the hospitals with beds, and then all the clinics and surgery centers and kidney and dialysis and everything else that we supply. So we had capacity in our workforce to where we were sending techs to all corners of the U.S. to support hospitals and other biomedical teams. And in the process, what we put together too was kind of a COVID preparedness package, of which was trying to get ventilators, the equipment for clients that were screaming for it. We also have a serology antibody test kit, the lateral flows that we're doing. We also have a product that's called microbiostatic. It's a system where it's a two-step system where we come in with foggers, we sanitize, and then we spray a bonding agent to whatever surface is out there. Doesn't matter what equipment, it just doesn't matter. It bonds to everything, and it's a 90-day adhesion to where it creates a very hostile environment for any microbe that would touch the surface. So if a person coughs and they have COVID, the fatty microbe will land on this surface, and then the best analogy I can use is the surface is a bunch of pins. So pins and needles, right? And then you've got this balloon that's floating along, and then it suddenly lands on this needle, and what happens is it pops it. And the same exact thing happens to a microbe. It explodes and dies. So it does not have an environment that it can stay on. So you can spray all your boxes with this stuff. 90 days.
Spray all the people this stuff.
Well, actually you can't. They have a hand sanitizer as well that's good for 6 hours. One application. Seriously, I mean, it's crazy stuff. Anyway, so we're doing stuff like that, and we sell PPE too, and we're putting that on our website. But we wanted to try to help as many people as we possibly could with it, and pull in as many products as we could to help healthcare, because we weren't prepared.
James,
There was zero preparation.
just in the interest of time.
Yep, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm given to rambling sometimes too, no offense. But my question in my mind is still unanswered, and you brought up PPE as well. Mine is basically an economic one. Supply, demand.
Absolutely.
We were presented a month and a half ago with, oh my God, demand is so much higher than supply. What are we going to do? And you and Tim have both told us stories of, hey, everybody, here's some supply. And demand was like, yeah, I don't need that right now. So do we have a better picture? Are we equilibrated? I mean, what Ford and GM are doing?
The curve was bent. To Shannon's point earlier, the curve was bent, right? So the perceived demand that was there dissipated as the curve came down. So the demand on beds, the demand on staff, and just in general the people.
So let me stop you.
Going into the hospital.
Are you saying that we as a society did such a good job of flattening the curve that the demand went away?
Generally, yes. I can speak from a Chicago perspective that my commute into the city, because I live in the northern suburbs, is just about the same as it was pre-COVID. So I don't know about sheltering in place from our perspective for essential or non-essential, but apparently everybody was still considered essential. So that's why we've extended our shelter in place through the end of May because of that fact. So there's some that did a great job. There's some that did not such a great job.
So your take today then on supply and demand is what?
My take today on supply and demand is the curve bent, and that is the reason for some of that dissipated demand.
Do you think that
Don't worry, as soon as we go back to work.
Yeah, right.
I'm sorry, Shannon.
We'll see. We'll see.
Don't worry. When we go back to work, we'll need them.
Yeah,
we'll
see a surge.
The flood of ventilators that'll come out of GM and Ford will glut the market and will be set forever?
Hopefully be able to meet that demand, yes.
Okay, meet demand sounds as though we're still shy, but we're not right now, so.
No.
So
I mean, you had companies like, you had companies like
Ford ventilator salesperson for the next decade. They're never going to sell anything ever again.
Let's put it this way, when this is all said and done, I wouldn't want to be a ventilator salesperson.
No.
How about a PPE salesperson?
That demand will be there forever and a day. We have a new norm, and this new norm is going to require us to have certain levels of PPE present as we continue down this path, regardless of us coming up with a
Vaccine.
Thank you. Sorry, I haven't had enough coffee. Regardless of the fact that we come up with a vaccine, we're still going to have these measures of, especially, we've basically got two camps: the people that are scared of the potential, right, and the other ones that just want to get back to work and don't really care about it. So those two camps, the demand is going to come from the fear mongers, and you're going to have. Sorry.
I'm going to take my New York and overwhelm your Chicago and interrupt you so we can, because we're at an hour.
Please.
I'm still getting a whole bunch of, Joe, do you know any place that I can get a gown or a glove or this or that? You both have inventory?
I'm sure Tim does. I do too.
Can pretty much anyone who needs something get something at this point, except somebody who wants to buy, 1 box of masks on Amazon. They'll continue to go unsatisfied. But everyone else who needs them in bulk can get them, you believe, at this point?
The amount of product that is coming out of China is unprecedented. 3M has doubled their capacity by the end of this month and will double again by the end of next month.
So you believe that pretty much in the next week or so, 2 weeks, the disequilibrium of supply and demand for PPE will find
so long as the FDA permits China's supply to come in to meet the demand, yes, because 3M cannot.
Let's go over to Ian,
meet
Mr. EUA. Well, working with your friend Michelle on EUA mask submissions in bulk. Do you have a sense of whether they're going to clear customs and be available for use, or is, how many EUA submissions do you think you're going to have to process to get all of the Chinese product into the country? And of course, there are folks from outside the US on the call as well, so this isn't just an American phenomenon, if you could talk to them. And folks, we are recording this. If you need to jump off, I completely understand. Next week, we're going to talk about intellectual property. Robert Isaacson, thank you for a suggestion about how to make that conversation even richer. And once again, if you have a chance before you jump off to type a comment of other topics that are particularly meaningful for you here, my goal in setting up these calls was not merely, let's get together and share information, which I frankly enjoy very much, and I'm starved for human contact, even if it's virtual at this point. But it's my hope that we can actually take something, have people connect over these calls and do something quite productive to help us in this pandemic. I'm not sure how effective these calls are in achieving that objective, but that's why I really want the feedback of the folks on the call, where you'd like to see these go, because my original intent was, oh my God, I have a huge group, there's a huge need, let me get people together and we can create a better outcome. And with the ventilator situation, and now PPE is equilibrating, and most of us on the call today who came here today to talk about diagnostic tests, we had a good conversation about it. But I, as an individual, even though I'm not a scientist, engineer, development person, don't know what I will do differently when I get off this call. I don't know how I am going to be able to alleviate some of the strain on the system to get people the tests that they need. And it was my hope that maybe we would unearth these things so that people could leave the call and go do something differently. If that's not realistic and people still want to talk about it, let's do it. If I need to rethink the purpose of these calls, that's fine. But really, I need to get the feedback from folks. If you'd be kind enough to leave a comment on your impression of the calls and where you'd like them to go and topics you'd like to have, I'd be very grateful. I think I just talked myself into a circle, and we're at an hour 5. Folks, maybe if in closing, you could each give not you, Jim, you've already, the rest of you, if you have maybe some closing thoughts on what we came here to discuss today and something that we can take for the week going forward, I'd be grateful. Why don't we start with the lady of the house?
Shannon Clark with UserWise. Thanks for having me. And I'm still hoping for home use serological test kits. I think it'll be really helpful to test antibodies. But as Tyler pointed out last week, perhaps home use testing paired with a 2-week wait period, because we don't know whether it's an active infection or not.
Okay. Ty?
I mean, really, my hope is that people go, if there are other test manufacturers out there, that we go above and beyond what is required of us by the FDA and make sure that we actually develop products that are useful and effective and safe and affordable. And I hope that the diagnostics community is able to rise to the occasion as many of the other frontline healthcare workers have during this pandemic.
Yep.
Ian? We cannot hear Ian.
You're muted.
Just to follow on
You're just
what
testing
Tyler
us.
said, in the beginning of March, we were testing somewhere around 1 to 10 tests per million residents. Right now, estimates are around 17,000 per million residents. So still lagging behind some of the other countries, but it's been a steep ramp up. FDA cleared 2 more additional serological tests, and I'm very hopeful we're going to get to the widespread testing where we can control this outbreak.
Thank you. While you were speaking, I shared with everyone a link that Christine Zomarodian shared with me. Last week's webinar with Jeffrey, Keith, and Elizabeth on the University of Washington infectious disease activities was phenomenal. If you want to click on that and check that out. Tim, closing thoughts?
My thoughts are exactly where Shannon and Ian are going, and everyone's going, is that when everybody goes back, when they go back to work, there's got to be a process for that. And the reality is it's PPEs and test kits. We've got to do this in the smart way. Otherwise, that curve is going to go through the roof. And if we can get the test kits out there, to the doctors and open the businesses the right way, then I think it would go smoothly. But if they don't follow that, we're gonna have some uptake.
Michelle, I had asked the group about will China get stuck at customs with all their product? You work with Ian on EUA mask submissions and the like. You wanted to add something?
Yep. So a lot of people in the United States don't realize the constraints in China right now on mask manufacturing. In the last week or so, the Chinese government has changed their export policy to where they now require in-country registration in China and proof that either you have the EUA or you have clearance in the United States. Just say, oh, I'm under emergency use, because China's trying to protect their reputation right now of having more false and bad products that are supposed to be protecting the healthcare workers from getting infected.
So I just made you a panelist. We are wrapping up, but to emphasize then, the rules have changed in the last week from China about shipping PPE product, and specifically, before you can ship it, you need to have the equivalent of Chinese FDA clearance before you can do that. Is that what you said?
An MPA.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's also
However, the FDA just issued a blanket EUA for masks that basically don't have any labeling on them. So on our side, you can get them in here.
What?
This just happened in the past week, that there's a blanket EUA for masks.
Last Thursday.
As long as you're not promising anything and you don't label the mask with anything, kind of like serological test kits. They've opened the floodgates.
Yes, they have.
I think you just said FDA is cool with anyone who has the word mask on a box to sell it.
Yep. That's true.
But you have to get them out of China. And as you know, China's just had an outbreak in northern China. So how much they're going to keep, and my understanding is that they're not letting 3M products masks ship out of China, which everybody thought, well, when Trump went out and said, hey, I'm going to make sure 3M is shipping those, China put out a law and said, guess what, 3M, you cannot ship those out of country. So it's something you don't hear about, but we're going to run into that happened a couple weeks ago, and it's a problem, and people don't understand that if China has a larger outbreak and a uptake, everything that we're asking for and we're getting from them is gone. So if we don't start doing it here, we're looking for September, October, November to be really, really nasty.
Wow, okay. Well, just to be courteous, Jim, do you have any short closing thoughts?
Okay, I'll try not to be so verbose. No, and just to add on, because some of Tim, you had some very good points. China is either buying up or attempting to buy as many of the serology labs as possible so that these test kits don't go out of China and or become so cost prohibitive to get them out. It's crazy. They bought up 27 different labs so far, and that number continues to grow. And the same thing's happening with the PPE. And once that happens, then they control all distribution for the rest of the world.
Yep.
Very.
I think we'll close on that note. The recording will be available on the channel that I've been sharing with you. I'll put it here again in the comments. And I welcome you all to, if you like, subscribe to it so that you get immediately notified when it's available. It takes quite some time for GoToWebinar to spool these things and then to download it and then to upload it. So that's the quickest way to get access to the replay. Thanks again for our panel. Next week, we're going to talk about intellectual property. And thank you, everyone who left a comment about what you'd like to see in the future. I will definitely take those under advisement.
Thanks, Joe.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Joe.
Have a great week.
Thank you.